Oh, hi. Welcome to Intimate Discourse. My name is Jason. Today's episode, School Shootings, Gun Laws, and Morrissey, was recorded on June 12th, 2022, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Good day, folks, and welcome to Intimate Discourse. My name is Jason. I'm here with Dimitri.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we're going to be talking about a few different things, but mostly focusing on, I guess, firearms in general and a knee-jerk resuscitation of a Canadian bill in particular. I think to start this, we should probably explain a little bit about, for those of you listening, for the most part with this show, we're trying to, we are located in Canada, and we focus some of our stuff on Canadian news and Canadian policies, but a lot of this obviously transcends Canada, and a lot of the things that we're discussing are similar things are occurring in the United States and in the rest of the Western world. The way this show has sort of is evolving, it seems to be like there are a lot of local Canadian things that we're talking about, but we do try to encompass it. We do try to sort of spread out that the topics to include the U.S. as well, because the U.S. has such a huge influence on Canada in the first place that it doesn't make sense to speak of Canadian policy in isolation necessarily anyway. But also, so those of you listening from the U.S. Can all feel included. No issue is more. I can't think of an issue that would be more emblematic of some of the few differences that exist between American and Canadian policy as that of firearms. In America, you of course have the right to bear arms. It is a contentious Second Amendment to the Constitution that every time there's any kind of school shooting or any really any shooting anywhere that is sort of makes the mainstream news and gets any kind of wheels, there will be the usual hand wringing in the States with politicians on both sides. It always seems like it's kind of the Democrats will yell until they're blue in the face, saying they want more gun control, and then the Republicans kind of do this little sidestep, never wanting to sort of forcefully say that they want to institute some gun control, because obviously a lot of the people that own guns and support the Second Amendment are will naturally sort of vote Republican. I think certainly overwhelmingly. So yeah, it's an interesting little dance, and it's a very difficult issue to talk about. I think that if there's a school shooting anywhere and you have, I don't know, I guess not any shooting anywhere, particularly school shootings, they're just the sort of the most heinous types of shootings. It becomes very difficult to, stand there supporting the existing structure of who can buy a firearm and everything, because it's very easy for the other side to say like, well, you don't care about kids or something like that. Like you're happy to see all these shootings, and obviously that's a very disingenuous argument. But sometimes that's what sells in American politics and Canadian politics and just politics. So I think it's important that we sort of start this thing off with distinguishing between where the American sort of collective psyche is on guns and where the Canadian psyche is on guns. We do not have in Canada any right to bear arms. We don't have anything enshrined in our Constitution that I'm aware of that gives sort of any allowance to do this. I think we evolved, as sort of like in many ways as Americans evolved as kind of individualistic and sort of outdoorsy. So there was certainly in frontiersmen. So there was use for guns in that milieu. But we were not, we didn't have a war of independence. So it was like we bifurcated there, and America, very wisely, in some people's opinion, and I would say in my opinion as well, I'll go out and get that out of the way, said that they should have a right to bear arms enshrined in their constitution, whereas in Canada, we just never had anything like that. We do have a firearms act. Like, there are certain, you can own guns, at least so far, but it is a procedure, we'll get, and I step through a little bit of the process just of what it does, what it takes to own one. And to sort of get your license in Canada. The whole process for doing that in Canada is a lot more rigorous and arduous than it is in the United States as well. So I guess, just starting there.
I think what makes America quite the unique case here globally is that they really are the country that was born out of revolution to the empire, to the British Empire, whereas pretty much everywhere else was, and especially here in Canada, we're just an evolution out of it. So it's right in like the DNA of what made them a sovereign state to begin with,
right,
to the point where it's in their constitution.
Yeah.
So it's really hard, I think, in the psyche of Americans to try to, it's almost like you're striking at the core of what makes them a sovereign state.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I agree. And it's really, I mean, just speaking personally, there's something so beautiful about the way America kind of came into being and how they, sort of the founding fathers, decided that they wanted to articulate a society in a specific way and lay down sort of immutable laws and balance the power, splitting up the balance of power, and sort of the amount of foresight I think that took, and the amount of thought that must have gone into that. It's just such a beautiful story, and
it really is tabula rasa of countries.
Yeah,
like completely starting from a blank slate. If we had the ideal situation on how to create, bearing down on 2,000 years of knowledge, how would we go about doing it?
Right.
Whereas everything else was an evolution out of something else. Mm-hmm. Right. This was literally starting from scratch.
And when you think of the they've been doing pretty good. Forget it now. 1789 was the Declaration, or 1776 Declaration of Independence. I forget. I'm not American, so I don't have this stuff at my fingertips. But
but not the 16 one.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah. So it's that's a long time for a lot of these rules to kind of continue to be respected and to continue to have support among most of the population, or at least a good portion of the population. So, all right, let's see. In Canada, so the impetus for this episode really is, there were a few shootings. The one in Uvalde, Texas, where this madman, I don't know what else you would call him, decided to go in and kill a bunch of children. And there was also something in Buffalo, which happened, I think, a week before that. You know what I'm talking about?
I do, but never. It's interesting that we're doing this podcast now, because never before have I been so almost disinterested, because it's happening. It feels like it's happening at such a rate you can only emotionally give yourself that space so often. It's kind of the same story repeated over and over for me. And it's terrible because it's a life, and we got to solve the issues, of course. But maybe it's coming out of the post-COVID world too. It's just like I'm just focused on like rebuilding my business and getting back to a healthy lifestyle.
Right,
and I don't know how much time and energy I really even have to put into the details, because the details seem to just you have 2 or 3 variations of the same story coming at you all the time.
Yeah, and you wonder. I guess the concern is that people just become desensitized to this, because it's just horrifying to think of having, you have your kids in a school and you can't get to them, and there's an active shooter. It just goes so beyond the thought of what anybody would even consider.
Well, if this was a 70s disaster movie, like The Towering Inferno or Poseidon Adventure, like it literally is a disaster movie, but like we're in like part 20 now.
Exactly. And so it's the sequels keep coming out, and you're like, oh, I wonder what happens in this one.
A shooting like you've never seen it before.
Right.
We have seen it before.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate. So I certainly am, because we're going to talk about the different sides to this, and I think that I don't think there's anybody like, I mean, it is certainly tragic, and I definitely can see the argument. I can definitely see the argument of wanting to ban guns and take away guns and everything like that. And the thing with policy is, when you're creating public policy and when you're trying to create, keeping to certain principles, like first principles that you have as a society, it's important to look at the details, and it's important not to legislate or not to form legislation based on emotions that haven't been properly processed. In Canada, the Trudeau government has put forth, so there's a Bill C-21, and it was, I think last year or 2 years ago, whenever they had the last election. Was that that was during COVID? That's right. That's right. Only he would call it during
fall 2021.
Yeah. So we had, fall 2021 is, I think, when this bill originally kind of died because Parliament was dissolved. And we had, so what we have here is Bill C-21 basically said, I think originally there were some laws on the books with this bill, but the bill has now been rewritten to include I don't actually have the actual language of it, but it's basically you can no longer buy, it has to do with handguns mostly, and you can no longer buy handguns, sell handguns.
What I have is like it's a national freeze on the purchase, sale, importation, and transfer on handguns.
Right.
Removing gun licenses from people with acts of domestic violence or criminal harassment, such as stalking or restraining orders.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. So this was announced by Trudeau in the wake of all the shootings and the shooting in Buffalo, I'll try not to get too. I find this very. Of course he would announce it then, but I think there's something that happens here. Let's just. I don't want to jump around too much.
Just to cut you off for a brief second, it is what I disdain so much about this is taking people's emotions from like events and then trying to then pass legislation through based on emotion rather than actual statistical fact.
Well, yeah, and also the linking of like what's happening in the U.S. as if the same thing would be likely to happen in Canada.
Did we say we need to shut down our CANDU reactors when Chernobyl blew up?
Right, exactly.
Well, did you see what happened? We need to do something here.
Although I have to say, living somewhat near the Pickering power plant at the time, I was a little, I was terrified of the whole Chernobyl drift or whatever. And then I was like, what is this thing in Pickering? Because I remember our school went there or something like.
Yeah. I always drive around it.
Just take a wide berth. Yeah. Yes, the shootings in Canada and the shootings in the U.S. are vastly different. We did have a big shooting that happened here in Nova Scotia. Like it was I think the biggest mass shooting we've ever had. And you just don't hear about really, I would be hard pressed. Well, I mean, there have been some in Toronto, in the Danforth.
Yeah, for sure.
So there have been some.
Yeah, and there was was it the Montreal massacre? Or the
right. Yeah, at the university.
So I mean, it happens, and just like it happens globally.
Yeah.
But at a much lower clip, let's say.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so the idea is this Bill C-21 will be posited to Parliament, and everybody will vote for it, and it will likely pass in the fall of this year. So I guess to start it off, how do you feel about gun ownership, Dimitri? Because we haven't talked really. Yeah, it's one of those issues we don't really.
I thought a lot about it this week. I've never been into guns. I don't really care about guns much. But at the same time, I have had a chance the last couple of years to work with a lot of Americans who are really into this sort of stuff, and the ones I've worked with treat their guns with so much like reverence. Right. It's like a golfer in their golf club sort of thing. They go on a Sunday morning, they go to the shooting range to hit some balls, or you go to the shooting range to fire off your rifle. And they're some of the most outstanding, law-abiding, trustworthy humans I've ever met.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine what it feels like emotionally to be told. And there are a significant number of people who in the population of 300 million people in the States who are like that. To be told like you're a bad person because you want this gun, and by having your gun you're in charge of partly responsible for what happened in a school shooting.
Right.
That just doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
But I love the metaphor that's used often, because I do feel it when the gun is like your symbol of your independence, your freedom, putting a check and balance on the state. The only thing I have to say though is I think that's a bit of a Trojan horse. I don't think in the end, if the FBI or Army show up at the front door of your steps, you're going to be able to really stop any sizable government incursion on your, let's say, freedoms with your whatever selection of guns you have.
Well, you had Waco, right? Like they had apparently sort of a stash of weapons, and that kind of postponed the FBI going in for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean. I always think of that Clash song, when they knock down your front door, how are you going to come? And with your hands on your head or the trigger of your gun.
Yeah.
And
at that moment, you want to be like, it riles you up. I totally feel it.
So if this bill passes and then they say, okay, now we want to do a buyback, or you have to surrender your gun.
Yeah.
Am I going to go out guns blazing just to you'll never take my gun? No, I'm not. I got to be like, all right, well, I'll complain about it, but I'm like, I'm not going to die for it. Right. Yeah. But it's like, but it is, but I think people in the States maybe would, you know what I mean? The passion for it and
it's in their constitution, it's in their DNA. You can imagine if your father owned a gun, your grandfather owned a gun, your great grandfather owned a gun. It does become cultural after a period of time.
Yeah.
And then to say you're going to take this almost cultural symbol out of my life.
Right.
And what does it symbolize? My freedom, my independence.
And maybe family heirloom or whatever's passed down from generation.
It's striking to the core of, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But just to make it a little more Canadian on the opposite side, like for a moment, if the Freedom Convoy trucker blockade in Ottawa, if they were armed with guns, would the situation have unfolded any differently? Would guns have helped the cause? My suspicion is they wouldn't have. When you mount a citizenry against who's like not going to be organized and fractured, against even a small number of highly disciplined military people, whether it be police or whoever they hired for that, it would have only made things worse. So I always strike back to like what actually creates those freedoms in a country to allow these things to allow the citizen to successfully push back against the government when their rights are being infringed on. Is it the gun, or is that just a bit of a false god?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because just saying that, I was thinking probably along the lines of you. And yeah, I think if anything, if they had guns, it would have been worse. Like it would have been easier for the government to sort of malign the people or...
and much more potential things to go wrong. And then the end result is against a small but disciplined police force, inevitably I think you're still going to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And if it escalates, then you've just totally lost the whole legitimacy of your cause.
True.
Right? So I don't see it being the right way out of it.
But I agree with you, but I don't think, I also think, okay, that's fine for that, isolated cases, but what if that kind of thing escalates? What if you have...
pockets all over the country.
Yeah, and then the government gets even more aggressive with taking away rights, right? Like eventually, a population might form, or they go to clubs or wherever.
You can't have a cop on every corner. So yeah, you're right. You can create your own.
Yeah, and if you get enough people together, then it's like, okay, well, we don't want to stand for this anymore, and it just seems to get worse. So it's like, and then if you have nothing but your, Swiss Army knife, it's not going to be. I mean, at least if you have a gun, there's some manner of. You can
push back.
Yeah, push back. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if diverting a bit, but I completely. The symbolism of what it will do, I'm 100% behind. I just don't know if the mechanism of actually gun ownership is the right thing to do. I will expand on it, like good education, a strong family structure, some money in the bank so you can actually afford to take time off to protest, having your financial independence, so you're not tied down by debt. I think a lot of those things, you put 200,000-300,000 people in Queen's Park, even unarmed, you can get the government's attention, right?
Right.
So what creates that mass movement? Is it the action of the gun, or is it how do we build individuals to be stronger and have more freedoms in order to be able to push back against the government?
Right.
Because then I wonder sometimes, does the government actually think we'll let you think it's the gun that actually stops us from running over your life, because then it diverts you from actually putting your focus where it should be. As an like you said, a strong family structure, some high level of education, financial independence, home ownership, judicial system that is 100% separate from the political system. Like that's really for me the framework which what creates a much stronger society. And the gun may actually be a distraction to that.
I think you're right with Canadian society. I think that's accurate. I think in the U.S. governments would think twice, because I think that there are enough people that own guns. I forget the number, but so even in Canada,
there's
that
like critical mass now. Like we're just not going to go in, sort of thing.
Well, I mean, there's like I forget the number, but I even know like in Canada, it's like there are 1 million handguns or something like that.
I think
right?
4 million people are part of the NRA. It's like actually signed up.
In the U.S. Or?
Yeah, so that's a sizable percentage of the population.
And I think it's like, I mean, I'm just saying this number. I don't even know if it's right. I was going to say like 25% sort of sticks in my mind is there's 25% gun ownership.
I think I heard 100 million guns.
Okay. Yeah, so it's probably, and and obviously there are a lot that have a lot more, people would have more than one gun, for example.
Yeah, you're right. When it hits critical mass levels of that nature over such a large landmass like America is, they have a much harder time to contain it. I mean, to your point, during lockdowns, are the states that were more open, I'm going to be a little generalizing, let's say they're more southern and more republic red states, I'm going to assume they have higher gun ownership. So would the gun ownership be part of the philosophical leanings of a state to such a degree that it actually was one of the elements in the recipe that allowed them to break free of these ridiculous mandates sooner than the blue states?
Yeah, it's interesting because it could have been two different ways. It could be two different things there. It could be that they're because they're high gun ownership, cumulatively the state eventually is like, okay, like let's kind of back off a little on some of these mandates, just knowing that sort of presence is there. Or is it just the fact that those kinds of people have, because there's more of them, they've just voted in parties that are more likely to represent their own philosophical leanings.
But the gun is part of that energy.
Yeah.
There's a part of that the symbolic freedom. I want minimal government. I want my human rights elevated to the top tier, importance.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a more individualistic based versus a community based philosophy.
Right.
But you could argue what makes a better society, and trying to fix things from a community based level, or let's build each individual so strong that therefore, by default, when you have a lot of strong individuals, you have a strong community.
Yeah.
I'm attracted to that point of view quite a bit as I get older.
Yeah.
And so that's why symbolically, I love the idea of the gun. I just don't know if in practical terms, especially in a place like Canada, does it actually do something?
So, you said earlier that if you have, I forget what you said, 1,000 or 10,000 people showing up in Queen's Park, that's going to get the government's attention.
Or even 200,000 or whatever, a huge number, yeah.
Okay, but we've also talked on this show about some laws that have been getting passed recently, which are limiting the amount of people where they can protest.
These are the Trojan horse. So is it actually the gun that's going to be creating your freedoms, or should we be watching these laws like a hawk?
Oh, well, or yes, I mean, but that's my point is that if we start getting situations where people can't really even protest in great numbers anymore, you really get that sort of diffusion of people, and it's not, you don't have those pockets of like potency anymore. So maybe the idea is the gun is something where, at least if people have that, that's one fundamental right that it's like, well, and again, it's not considered a fundamental right in Canada. I'm speaking philosophically, if people have the right to own a gun, then maybe there is a little bit of that pushback.
Well, a smaller number, to your point, I think a smaller number of people will be more potent if they're armed versus, 5,000 people armed at Queen's Park is going to be at least be equally as potent as 200,000 people unarmed. And to your point, how do you get 200,000 people to actually show up if the weather's bad or you're not allowed to stand on the streets and there's limited amount of green space? They kind of have cornered off these zones where you're allowed to legally protest to only hold a certain number of people anyways.
Right.
I believe it's in Calgary, or at least somewhere in Alberta, that you are no longer allowed to protest while standing on the streets. So they talk about the trucks all the time blocking the roads, but the truth is it's anything blocking the roads, even people. Yeah. So what is a legal protest when you create the parameters around it that are so narrow you can never actually hit mass acceptance anyways?
Yeah.
So maybe having a gun is actually something that makes a smaller number more potent.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. It's something to consider.
Yeah. It is. I think so. Like one of the reasons, well, the reason I think the Americans enshrined this in the Constitution was that it was to protect themselves from a tyrannical government, right? And we might not have, like, as much as we might find our government sort of inching in that direction, it would be hard pressed to, sort of say in good faith that the Trudeau government are complete tyrants, right? Like, I mean, when you compare them against like actual tyrants from the past, I wouldn't say that there aren't those leanings, but you start seeing some of these rights being eroded, and you start thinking like, if this kind of attitude, whether it's with Trudeau or with some other, whoever the next prime minister is, you start seeing this kind of go down the road 10 to 15 years, and we get some of these, social credit scores, things that we've been talking about, like kind of start rolling out, then, maybe though the gun starts looking a little more attractive for Canadians too, right?
You're right. I think the gene for authoritarian tendencies that was expressed in 2000 BC will come out in a certain way versus 0 AD versus 2000 AD. You're
Right.
still seeing those tendencies in a modern form come out, and they need to be kept and checked. Whether it's Cleopatra or Alexander the Great or Pierre Justin Trudeau.
Isn't it amazing?
It's the same issue, right? It's the same
You
issue.
should never put him in the same sentence.
I'd particularly, I put those. Actually, I kind of like the other two, but you get my point. Like a Nero or something like that.
Yeah.
Hitler or whatever. Yeah.
Don't you think it's amazing though? Just I know you're quite into psychology, and just thinking of sort of almost like the mass psyche of just human beings and how this thing really does just crop up. It's the same problems over and over again. It's a constant battle.
So again, the gun may be a part of the solution, but are we actually getting to the core issues here?
Yeah.
That's why sometimes I feel like it's a false god or a Trojan horse. Like, what is actually happening? Because we're repeating. Like, Justin Trudeau may just be the year 2022 version of a dictator from 2,000 years ago. This is just the face of dictatorship in a modern, technological, highly industrialized society.
Yeah, in a democratic society. So it's kind of like you can't
start merging parties together and forcing through votes. It's not that far away from the authoritarian rule.
Right.
And that tendency is there.
Yeah.
And you got to then ask yourself, what are the mechanisms we have to check that tendency? And are they holding up?
Yeah.
Or are they being eroded?
Right.
So yeah, the symbolism, I'm with you. I'll say it like I love the idea of the gun. I just don't know if in practicality, in countries other than America, it's going to really be the solution we're looking for.
Okay. So I've got my gun license. It's funny though, again, with the differences between the two countries. Like I've never felt passionate about it or anything. Like it's cool. Like it's cool having it. But it's it was a big process to get the license. It was so in Canada, you have to get a possession. It's called a PAL, possession and acquisition license, I think it is. And it's I mean, it's 3 days. Like you have to go to a classroom for a couple days, and you have to get 2 people to sign off on you that aren't family. So like, just trying to imagine like being somebody. I mean, it really like how lonely do you have to be if you don't have like at least 2 people, that can sign off?
It already puts you in the incel category.
But you know what? The funny thing is when I got mine,
and get some people to sign up for you.
yeah. But the funny thing is like it's not easy. Like I think it's probably maybe the circles I run in or whatever is, and probably similar with you. Like just going up to a friend of yours and being like, hey, do you mind signing this reference so I can buy a gun? Like it's kind of an awkward thing to ask, because like the person, like I did have somebody who said no, and they were kind of thought I was joking when I was said that, and I was like, no, I'm getting one, like and he didn't want to sign off. And I'm like, okay,
no one else is going to stop me.
But it is kind of a weird ask. Like in Canada, there's just not that culture. So it's like, and especially in, again,
I've never been
Toronto,
asked and even
like,
know. I'd be shocked if somebody asked me.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Stunned,
Yeah, just like a friend of yours just like, hey, like, because you're like, well, what is this for?
And
like,
to be quite frank, even though I don't really have a position on this, if my brothers were to come and ask me to sign off, I don't know if I'd actually sign it.
I know, because it's like, is this a
strange.
cry for help? Or
Yeah, like, am I complicit in some way? Am
Yeah.
I aiding some weird thing? I would be frozen. I'd have to think about it.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and it's an awkward thing. Like but it's funny though. It's just really contrasts contrasted with the States, where I think it's, I don't think you even need to sign off. I think you can just go and buy one, and there is some measure of background checks, I think, but I don't know how much. But in Canada, there are a lot of like the RCMP investigates you for like, I don't know, it's minimum of a month or 6 weeks or something, where I can't remember. I think they called a couple of people. They called my partner to, who I live with. So, and like, I assume she gave a glowing reference because eventually I got it. But yeah, and it took a long time to get it. So it's not like, it's not like there isn't gun control in Canada.
So there is a registry and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, for sure. Oh, and I get letters from them. You have to change, and there are so many rules and restrictions. Like you can't have. So if I have a gun, like I can't have my gun outside of my safe. I had to buy a safe just to keep it locked, and I'm the only one who knows the combination. So it's like it becomes a very like I can take it to the gun range to shoot, and I can take it out to clean it. So that's about it. Like so
otherwise it must be locked all the time.
Yeah. So it's not like it's like there's a lot of gun control laws around that. So that's why so when I hear these kinds of things announced, in Canada where it's like, oh, we were going to stop the sales. I mean, like, the people who are committing crimes are not the people who are buying guns. Like that's the whole process. Like if they were going to do that, they wouldn't have, if somebody's planning to commit a crime, you don't go out and spend, a weekend, booked well in advance, by the way, because there's always a backlog.
Yeah. And if that person, I'm just willing to bet a lot of times they have quite a few guns on them. Like go out on a bit. So then would they have to individually sign up for each and every gun?
Yeah,
well, they're probably not going to go through that process,
And like that guy.
So then, therefore, that gun must be then criminally purchased.
Right.
In order to get the quantity of guns they'd want to do mass damage with.
Yeah.
That's funny you say that, though. My Canadian genes must have been triggering, because as we were planning this podcast, I was thinking to myself, like, what would fix the United States? Like, well, couldn't they do it something like you're mandated to keep it inside a locked safe or something and only bring it out? And then I can only imagine, well, it's my gun. I'll sleep with it underneath my pillow if I want to.
Yeah.
And like, how do you get around that? But here in Canada, we just don't do that. Yeah. Don't they in New York in the 80s institute some law that if your child breaks a window, the parents, if the child is under 18, the parents are charged? So there was that sort of like they would, find, where does the root cause of the problem? So I was thinking about the same thing in the States. If someone's 17-year-old were to take Papa or Mama's gun and go kill people, at some point, aren't the parents also responsible?
I think that's not a bad idea. Like if they're under 18, they're in your house and you're not keeping your gun locked in a safe and they use that gun to commit a crime, then I think there is some.
And you may not have to keep it under, like it may be a little bit like a hybrid, not quite as Canadian where you're mandated, let's say, to keep it inside a safe. But if you don't, and it's used for something criminal, you're in charge. Right. So it's the onus would be on the gun owner.
That's a much more, you're talking about sort of even the COVID mandates and stuff like that. It's like putting more responsibility onto the person, which is where it should be in a society, and it's like,
but with real responsibility, repercussions. Like I didn't know my son was going to take it and shoot someone. Well, guess what? You should have known. It's your son and it's your gun.
Right.
Yeah. There is some at some point. The point is, if it goes over 18, then what do? I like a legal nightmare. Let's say you can make it 21 or something. I don't know. You can't drink in the States until you're 21.
Yeah, whatever the age is. And, like I think the details are things that could be sorted out, but it's, I think there's definitely ways to do these kinds of things without just saying you can't buy a gun.
Yeah. There is a middle ground.
There is a middle ground. So the guy, and I don't, they do something on the Daily Wire where they don't actually, and I didn't know this, but where they don't say the name of the killer. If whenever any shooting or anything like that, they don't say it. And I didn't realize that, and I heard that, and I was like, oh, you know what, that's kind of a great idea.
Fantastic, yeah.
So I won't say the name of the guy, although his name really fits to a T, the Nova Scotia shooter.
Okay.
I won't say his name, but it sounds like he sounds like a horrible human being just by his name.
Well, I mean, you're getting, because a lot of them just want to live in, the history books sort of thing. They want to be the Ted Bundy or something,
sure.
right?
Yeah. Well, so you just did it, sir.
Ted Bundy?
Well, you just named the name.
Well, I mean, that one's already out there.
All right.
There's BC AD sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to Greek history, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was this giant temple, I think in what is now Western Turkey.
Artemis?
I forget.
Okay.
And the point is, some Greek citizen decided, well, the way I'll become really famous in history is if I get known for the person that had burned down this temple.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the seven wonders was burnt down for precisely this sort of notoriety. And so they made it a thing in their culture that that name would never be spoken of again.
Yeah. Good.
Right.
Yeah.
So, these are problems we've been wrestling with since antiquity.
Yeah.
you know?
There's that, and not to get all up on a soapbox, but there's that a Netflix documentary on that guy, and I forget his name, and I don't want to say it anyway, but it's the guy who like was killing those cats, and then he ended up. Remember, he was or he wanted to be a
Vaguely.
fashion model or something, and he said he was like. He did this whole thing where he pretended that Carla Homolka. He basically went to the news and denied any relationship with Carla Homolka,
Okay.
But like nobody had said that they were in one. We just sort of did that as a seedling to be like, oh, who's this guy that is not in a relationship with Carla Homolka? And so anyway, he's like completely insane, and he ended up murdering this guy and killing a bunch of cats, which is anyway.
Oh, was he the guy with the bleach blonde hair? And the guy he killed was Asian, I believe.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I do remember him.
And so
I won't say the name, but I think I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, the Netflix documentary now, on principle, I'm curious about that kind of thing. Like it's like any of that kind of stuff is interesting, but I purposely didn't watch it because I was just so.
It's bad energy.
I was
too,
like,
right?
yeah, it is bad energy, and it's like supporting that notoriety quest. I mean, and I won't say that I've never watched like true crime stuff is kind of interesting, but it's like, I don't know. It is. We gotta sort of. That's one of the things we can do is sort of take that power away from people who would do something like this.
It's like walking away from a fight almost. Like why you have to reciprocate almost for it to elevate to a certain point. So you just walk away from the story.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
see you. I'm not even playing with this.
Yeah.
You're nobody, and you're gonna stay nobody.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this guy in Nova Scotia shot up went on an absolute rampage, worst in Canadian history. And all of his guns, I actually, I don't know if all of them, but most of them were smuggled in from the US. So like you said, like about getting, if you're going to do it, you're probably going to end up getting a bunch of them, and you're probably going to do it illegally, because why would you go through the whole process
Otherwise,
to get a gun?
there would be a lot of people who signed off who were really wrong.
Yeah.
2 signatures per gun.
Right.
You fooled a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, it's per license, but yeah.
Per license.
Yeah,
And once
yeah.
you have a license, you can get many guns then?
Yeah, so there are prohibited weapons which you can't get.
Yeah,
Like there's certain weapons that
Sure.
if you're a police officer or there's another one.
And even
like,
that's dubious. There's assault weapons, assault style weapons. Isn't every weapon an assault of some sort? Like
there
really,
is, and I think the details to some extent matter, because it's like it's the difference between having if somebody has like a howitzer outside on their lawn, then it's like, okay, like that's seems dangerous. You know what I mean? Like I can see the argument for I can again like I can see the argument from a public safety perspective for a lot of these things, but my position is that something like, well, first of all, I think it's disingenuous the way this is being done. I don't think that we have the problem that the United States has. I don't think there's a need to ban handguns or to do a freeze on them.
Don't the police
I
say
think
every year that crime is going down? And we, citizens
Yeah.
are like, man, the city's getting worse. We never used to have these issues. And then
Right.
somebody will come on, the news and be like, actually, statistics are better this year. And there's been a downward trajectory for a 20 to 30-year period. And the average person's like, what are you talking about? It feels so much different. When we were kids, we'd ride bicycles till 9 o'clock at night. Now we walk our kids to school because we don't know what's going on. So I always get caught between those two feelings. Like, is it truly safer now or not?
So I actually did do a little research on that, and because my thinking was always that a lot of these problems have always existed, so that it probably happens. Like, first of all, even in America, the chances of you getting shot by a gun, or sort of killed by a gun, I guess, are like it's more likely that you'd be struck by lightning.
Yeah, it's
It's
exceedingly
5 times more likely that you'd be struck by lightning than killed by a gun in the States. So, and that's not even taking into consideration whether it's it's not like that. Like lightning is random.
Yeah,
like if you're in a
there's
low
big
crime area
delineations,
and everything, then it's even lower than that.
Yeah.
So it's like, so these arguments that come out that are like, oh, look at all these shootings and everything. It's like, I get the emotion behind it.
Sure.
And I won't even say, like, I would say in the United States, that probably, if there was some gun control law, I think it's a reasonable thing to expect that the crime does come down, or that gun-related violence comes down a little bit. But that being said, a lot of the stuff is happening, like all these like shootings in the city, a lot of them are happening with illegal guns anyway. And you have to understand that you're not getting something for nothing. It's not like, well, like, what do you need a gun for anyway? Like, it's that mentality of like, I'll decide what somebody else can want or what somebody else can have. I think is dangerous to have. When we have all these rights being eroded all the time, it's like everybody has something that they don't want taken away, right? So like, and I get that the gun is more, dangerous, but the people, I think, overwhelmingly, the people that are buying these things, like people that are legally just going to target shooting or whatever, are getting them for. Like they're going through all these steps because they don't intend to do anything bad with them. They want them for protection.
And I think the people that actually like have such reverence for the gun and like the care for it and to learn and get better at it. It's like it's a sport for them, like
for
fishing
sure.
or golfing or something. So, yeah. Did you find any stats at all in terms of the total sum of shootings in the States? How many come from like inner city gangs versus like actually mass shootings at schools?
I don't know about the U.S. I know in terms of Canada how many, in terms of the years, like how the trajectory of whether there's more or less or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, I have heard anecdotally that it is a lot more that just happen. The school shooting scenario is relatively rare.
In total sum.
Yeah, in terms of the total number.
Like for every 1,000 people who get shot by a gun in the States, monthly or whatever the number might be, what percentage of that 100,000 comes from inner city versus school shootings? Like a factor of 99 to 1, 95, 90? Like it's really exceedingly...
Yeah.
My point is, it's not going to solve the vast majority of the problems having more gun laws.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like a lot, like Chicago, for example, is just drowning in crime right now because
if you could just shut down the city of Chicago and pretend it never existed, you could actually, that sort of thing, right? So you're right. So what are we actually going to achieve in net sum by creating all these laws?
Yeah.
And it's terrible because I think some laws, like you were saying, the Canadian version of them could go a long way and help, and at least give people the sense of responsibility and security about such ownership of a weapon. Mm-hmm. But would it actually, like I believe I did see, like even here the Canadian, the police chiefs are saying, more regulations are not going to stop the number of handguns actually circulating in the city.
Right.
And these are the police chiefs.
Yeah.
So they must be sitting on some data here, like where are the actual guns coming from, and what percentage are these guns being allocated to the actual crimes that are happening?
Yeah.
Right, are really high.
Yeah. So the Toronto police deputy chief did say that guns that were used in crimes last year, that of the ones that they could trace, 86% of them were smuggled into Canada from the U.S. So
there you go.
They weren't even legally obtained. So it's like, this certainly seems like political opportunism. You have Trudeau announcing this in the wake of 2 shootings in a country that wasn't us. It has completely different laws on this, and now saying that they, because there's a lot of support for a lot of people just aren't gun owners.
That is a devastating stat towards those who are pro-gun control.
Yeah.
Because at best, if they were to achieve 100% success with the new rules they wish, they'll have a reduction of 14%. And the other 18%, 86% will still be occurring.
Right. And, and I would say that's even, because you'll certainly get people arguing like, well, even 14% is too many. And like, and,
sure.
Certainly like everybody, nobody wants anybody to die. But here's the thing is like, I understand the argument of people who say, look, nobody should have any guns because it's just, even if you have one gun and it goes off and if somebody dies from it, that's one too many. And yes, that, nobody wants anybody to die. However, when I got my license, there were like sort of things I had to say to everybody so everybody wouldn't think I was insane. Mm-hmm. But like, I would say like, well, I want to go to target practice. And I think a lot of people do this. It's like, they would like the sporting of shooting gun. And it's like, yeah, it's cool. It's fun to do. Like, and you can kind of improve with it and everything like that. So there is that. But the truth is like, I don't do a lot of target practice. I every once in a while I'll go with my friend to the shooting range and it's kind of fun, but it's not like there are a lot of other things that I would like to do too, that I would rather do. But the main reason I got it was because I'm concerned about the same thing that the people, the sort of founding fathers in America were concerned about, and that is the tyranny of a government, or either that or the complete breakdown of society. And ironically, I got this just before the COVID pandemic kind of started, and I was like, well, see, like when I started, like, well,
imagine,
I was like,
imagine if every handgun owner was, assuming it's a handgun like you have, but like every handgun owner in Canada did exactly what you did. Like I'm kind of gun neutral, but I think I'm going to buy one. It's more for the political representation of the rights of being a free citizen. I'm going to get it all done perfectly legally and do what they say and keep it inside my box, locked. The only person who knows the thing, the code is me. And then all of a sudden, let's say out of the 20, 25 million adults we have in Canada, each person has a gun. That does have a symbolic gesture towards the ruling government, how far the citizenry is going to go along with things.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? They're going to man, the population doesn't trust us. They'll never use those guns. They'll never pull them out. If we need to bully them with the army, we can. But they are weary of expanding powers.
Yeah. And,
and they've shown that through the purchase of this weapon.
Yeah.
You know, that there is something symbolic about it. I'm not saying whatever we were arguing a little bit before about the effect, could it actually be, something that would change the way government, who knows? But symbolically, I have to agree with you. There's something there. I think it would say we have a strong, independent, free-thinking, willing to do it themselves populace. And we need to govern them then lightly and appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, you can even look at the fact that Trudeau didn't actually ban guns outright. Maybe, and I don't know for sure if this is his motivation, but maybe there was something to be like, okay, he'll get the political points for what he did do, because a lot of people support that. And look, we live in a democratic society, so it's not that I think, I disagree with that, but if this is what most people want, then that's why we you can't have everything. I can't have everything that I want as a citizen. I have to be able to, argue my point, make my case, and then if everybody wants it the other way, then so be it.
The facts have to come out too. When the media becomes just a propaganda arm for the government, and people make emotional based decisions.
I wonder how much of the thought went into the Trudeau government's decision on this. That okay, we better not say and we're going to take you have to forfeit or surrender your guns. All the people if there's 1 million guns in Canada, that's a lot of people. And that's, a bit of a political blowback, but probably not, because a lot of those people aren't going to vote for Trudeau anyway, just statistically speaking. But there would be the possibility for there being a lot more of maybe there would be an armed rally, or something like that. Or you'd be carrying around their little suitcases that are locked, abiding by the law.
Yeah. The suitcase in Pulp Fiction.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. The government would have to at some point sit back and say, well, if each purchase of a gun is sort of a vote, how are the populace voting? Right? We have 25, 30 million people that said, no, we don't want that kind of society. And I'm showing you by purchasing a gun. Mm-hmm. Not that the gun will ever be used. It's just the act of actually doing such a thing tells the government there's only so big the populace wants you to be.
Right, yeah.
We want a limitation on your powers.
Yeah.
And we, just like an arms race, we pray to never use any of these things. Mm-hmm. But all the major countries in the world have nuclear weapons. Right? It kind of creates a stalemate. A strong population is a peaceful population to a large degree.
And I think some of this also, when you think of, I think of the Russian army, for example, and what's happening in Ukraine. I bet there's, a good deal of them that are not supporting what's...
We're certainly sending a lot of handguns to citizens there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no problem there. But when you think of the Russian army going into these villages that are fairly similar ethnically and everything, and it's a fairly I guess what was my point here? That I think that it's one thing to say if say the Trudeau government want to put forth some mandate that you have to, I don't know, everybody has to forfeit their television sets or something ridiculous. But so then worst case scenario, they send in the army to go do that. It's one thing if the army goes in and they have an unarmed population or just complaining and maybe they feel bad about what they're doing, but they go in and they take it anyway. What happens but if people are armed and the army has to sort of enforce some arbitrary, something that doesn't sit right with them in the first place, then maybe they'll think twice and they'll be like, you know what, I don't even agree with this. And these people are armed, so it's more dangerous for me. There's a little more, I think that genuinely the people in the armed services, those and police are the people that actually do want to serve the society, right? For the most part. So when you get governments giving rules that don't sit right with them, I think it might give them that little extra incentive if, if you do have people who own guns, they might be like, not only do I not agree with this, but I also don't want to get into a situation where, somebody's armed and I'm going in there and then they're like, something else goes down.
It's another layer to prevent that erosion of rights.
Yeah.
Whether it's a large layer, a substantial layer, we can argue all the details of that. But yeah, I'm starting to change my opinion as I'm talking to you here a bit, because I was calling it, a false god or what else did I say? A false god or a Trojan horse of sorts.
Right.
Good governance is really the way to go about it. And I still believe all that, but perhaps I kind of liked the thought that came out that this kind of creates like a Cold War, an arms race a bit, and the tension alone keeps the peace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's a constant tug of war, like against those who are in power and those that don't have power.
Well, doesn't
I know I'm
power
sounding
always
like
want
a
to
Marxist.
grow? Like the government, by definition,
yeah.
they have things they want to get done, and
Right.
In a sense, democracy slows that down.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they're like, well, we just need to get this done. By the time that people vote for climate change, the world will no longer exist. We need to have power to get through, and insert whatever's the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Right.
point is, they're looking for more efficient ways of doing things. I think there's always a tug of war towards freedoms of the individual towards efficiency of the state.
Yeah. So there's an interesting quote. I love this quote by Edward Snowden, and think what you will about him. I won't sort of comment on my opinion or whatever, but like I think this is a really great quote. He's talking about privacy here, and in the context of it, this is in his book. I forget the name of it now, but or actually one of his books. I think he has more now. But he says, I'll just read it. To refuse to claim your privacy is actually to cede it, either to a state trespassing its constitutional restraints or to a private business. Ultimately, saying that you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different from saying that you don't care about freedom of speech because you have nothing to say. And so I would say that in context with some of these rights that are being eroded. I know that it's not popular. I know that in Canada especially, gun rights is a bit of a no-brainer for a lot of people. It's like, of course people shouldn't have guns, you know what I mean? And like these kind of arguments, I think people sort of view as specious, where it's like, if I was saying like, I want to have a gun because I'm worried about the tyranny of a government, right? Like it's like, first of all, I would argue nobody ever thinks their government's going to turn tyrannical, but the past is littered with examples of it happening, right?
Yep. I'll just interrupt you for a sec, but I think we make a very potentially fatal error here in Canada, in that we are a new country, born in the who came to rise in the most 70 years of the most peace and prosperity the world has ever known, and we've never really seen bad governance. So we have been acclimatized to being like naive to the actual dangers in the world.
Yeah.
Really, we've had 70 years since World War II of the most peace and most prosperity and generally good governance.
Yeah.
So to have this, doomsday cloud looming over us, and therefore we need these freedoms, is something that I think for a large percentage of the population is outside the scope of their everyday thinking.
Yeah. That's a good point. I agree.
We're naive. Yeah.
We've been blessed.
Soft.
Yeah.
We've been blessed, and that's where, education, going back to other things other than the gun that can protect your freedoms, being well educated and looking at the world on a global scale and understanding the arc of time and history and power and the psychology behind this and the financial motives. Then you start to see a lot more clearly, and you can have the benefits of living in such a free society, knowing that these things are always on the horizon, and it's up to us to actually protect it from never growing to that extent.
Yeah.
Kind of like a tumor. Like, it's there and you got to keep it in check.
Right.
You'll never get rid of it completely, let's say, but you're aware of it, and you just keep going. Instead of like, I've enjoyed perfect health my whole life, I'll just eat whatever I want. Then all of a sudden something tragic happens when you're 60. Like, I wish I had known when I was 40.
Right. Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Right. Just know that it's there, and you have to be part of the process in keeping it in check.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this quote by Snowden, while it was said about privacy, you could sort of compare it to something like the gun laws or something like any of these rights, where if you looked at them individually, you might say like, well, I don't know, I don't need, like smoking in restaurants or whatever. Like for the government to come up and say, you can't smoke in restaurants anymore. It's a public health thing. It's like, first of all, I don't smoke, but But I don't think that that's a fair law to put forth. And the reason I don't think so is because I just think that this is something that the market can decide for itself, right? Like somebody allows smoking in their restaurant, great. Like all the smokers will go there. Most likely, I think what would happen is naturally most people would just not want to go to a restaurant that's filled with smoke. So eventually,
that can become the tyranny of the minority too, though.
in what sense?
Well, what percentage of Canadians before they created no smoking in clubs, let's say, smoked? Like less than half. Yet 100% of the clubs allowed smoking. So I don't know if I've never seen prior to that.
This is coming from, I know you would go through this because you were a
It never
non-smoker.
bothered me. I accept what, being in that age group, I accepted that's what a club is, But when I think about it mathematically, I don't think the market forces were there. Even though that the majority of people weren't smoking, they were never strong enough to actually say, well, we'll get rid of smokers and not let them into this nightclub. I never saw it prior to like it being legislated.
No, but then you have an industrious nightclub owner who says, you know what, this nightclub you can't smoke in.
But it never happened.
No, well, but maybe it should have. Maybe I don't know. Did it never happen? Like I've never. I think I remember there being a restaurant once that was smokeless, and it was called Smokeless Joe's. If I got that right.
Okay, but there's restaurants that you eat in like a total darkness. Like those are like those one-off trendy things.
But I'm saying if where there's a will, there's a way. Like if there's people that feel strongly enough, if there's such a health outcry, and you see that everybody's who's smoking is getting like cancer, people are going to eventually say like, you know what, I don't want to go in a place where there's all this secondhand smoke, and they'll go to another club. If you have the other option,
that's where it becomes culturalized. Like you're just like, well, I guess I don't prefer clubs of smoke, but that's just the way they've always been.
But then
you just accept it.
But then it's like I don't know. I don't.
Or to your point, you can say restaurants because all ages can eat in restaurants. But in nightclub, in order to drink, you have to be 19 and older in Canada. So as an adult, you make your adult decision. Live by the sword, die by the sword. You're an adult now. So I would actually differentiate between clubs because of the alcohol age limits in order to get in versus a restaurant where you're bringing small children to.
Maybe, but they still have a choice not to go to the restaurant, and you still have maybe you can say something like, okay, the ventilation, like you have to have like the smoking section, non-smoking section has to be more than just like.
But didn't society get better when we got rid of that rule?
It doesn't. To me, it doesn't matter. That's beside the point. Even if it did, right? Like I recognize that I when I see somebody smoking now, I'm like, oh, that seems archaic. That causes cancer, right?
You're riding a bicycle without a helmet. I know. It becomes normalized.
Normalized, but it's bad to me that it did. Like it's bad that that's the way it became normalized. Like it would have been better, I think, if it was. I think I talked about this before in terms of like if you try to force something down somebody's throat, it doesn't resonate in the same way as if it organically kind of. The change happened organically.
But could you argue? Just take the opposite. Could you argue then that's the role of the state to kind of create a new culture within a country? Like to take a bit of a slightly more dangerous analogy, like why stop at a red light? Who's to tell you to stop your car? But we're all better off at it. You say, well, a car might be coming the other direction, so we'll just make everything four-way stops, sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I could make an argument with that. I've made the argument before that that the traffic laws, like you see, I can make an argument for it. I don't necessarily believe that that's eventually, like for example, like in my mind, it's like, okay, you can go whatever speed you want, and just the Autobahn, like everywhere. You can do even right in front of a schoolyard. You want to go 140 kilometers an hour, go ahead. But you kill a kid or you kill anybody, it's life in prison or the death penalty. Like that's like that.
In that vein, like I am sort of a free speech absolutist in that the classical example. Well, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. Like why not?
Right,
because if you're caught out and you're wrong, there'll be a consequence for that. So it's your words, your actions, your consequences. And also, as a person listening to someone yelling fire, I have some personal responsibility to at least turn my head before we all trample out the door and see, is there actually a fire or not?
Right.
Like there's a bit of that too.
Yeah, so, where did that come from? That kid in the front, like does he, you know what I mean? You look down, you don't see any fire. It's like, okay, well, he's probably lying.
Yeah, it's I guess in each and every scenario, you're gonna have to sit there and take a look at it and just like what is the correct answer here.
So just to address your question, because it's a good question, and like I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any laws. I think that it's the government's job to create laws, and it's the people's job to make sure those laws don't go too far. And I think that we've gotten really, like you said, we've become, just kind of, we've allowed, we're comfortable, and we let the government kind of take things away because they're like, well, that seems to make sense, like, well, of course it makes sense to wear masks, like, or of course it makes sense to mandate vaccines. Why wouldn't somebody want to be safe? And you start getting these like things which are really personal choices, like, you want to go to a club that has smoking in it, then that's your choice to go to that club. Like, you don't have to go there. Nobody's putting a gun to your head. And if you know what, if you can't find any club that doesn't have, like, if no business owner comes forth and says, like, here's a non-smoking club, which would, to seem to me, would be a brilliant idea, because you'd get the more that smoking is maligned and the more that smoking is, just kind of proven how dangerous it is, then why wouldn't there be a club owner who would do that? And then people would see how successful they were, and then everything would change. Or the inverse
today, someone come around and say, I'm going to make a smoking club. I applied for a special license or something, and see where the people decide to go. Yeah,
for sure. And, that stuff, I think it's better when those things happen organically, and we really have to limit what the government is dipping its hand into. And it comes back to this Edward Snowden quote, where it's like, just because you don't necessarily have anything to hide doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about privacy, right? Yeah. So it's like,
that's like they say in communist Russia. You have nothing to. If you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Right.
Yeah, it's exactly like we hear that being repeated in Western society today.
Yeah.
Which only shows you how much we're actually picking up on some of this totalitarian, authoritarian type rhetoric in our own messaging here.
Yeah.
Which I've actually quoted that before, and it's quite terrifying, because we're just like, and talking about the average person. Like, we just had elections here for Ontario in our province, and it was the lowest voter turnout, I think, of all time, percentage-wise.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
And so, you're talking about all these individual laws, and it's all we can do to get people to come out and vote once every 4 years.
Yeah.
And then from that vote, stem all these new laws that seem to, just sort of propagate afterwards.
Yeah.
So people are really looking to your point, like, they're deferring, like, will I even vote? What difference does it make? You know, and you're lucky to get their opinion on everything once every 4 years.
Yeah, it is good to see, I must say.
Which is a negative. Sorry to cut you off. Which is a negative thing, because then they're not putting any personal responsibility on how their own laws are shaping in their own country.
Right.
You can't even get them to come out and vote for a single leader.
Yeah. I must say I had a little bit of voter apathy in this last provincial election, because I wasn't really. I mean, I voted for somebody who wasn't one of the major parties. And even that, it was kind of like, I don't know much about them. I kind of went on their website and I was like, sounds good. Because it was more like almost a protest vote. Like, I didn't necessarily anyway, like there was no major party that was really representing everything I did. Like, I think there were a lot of things that the Conservative Party did. Normally I would have voted for the Conservatives, but they're just a very, like, I don't know, it seemed very heavy-handed with a lot of the COVID stuff. And, I that's sort of where I went.
The incredible thing here was that, we had the Conservative Party running Ontario, which was the party that was responsible for all the shutdowns in the last 2 years. But ironically, it was the leader, Doug Ford, who was then the one more talking about recovering the economy and opening things up. So the man that actually shut us down took the position of, let's get past this and open up. And the other two parties that were still sort of, we must mandate vaccines for all children going to school, and masking should still be. They actually became the lockdown parties.
Right.
So it was quite. So I think that switcheroo kind of threw everybody's like mental game off here a bit.
Yeah.
Like, how can the guy that told us to lock down now be the guy that's actually out of the major parties, promoting us to reopen up? You don't believe anything at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the other two choices, like, really, we're going to do more of this? Like, we're done. We don't want to do this. And I was very happy. I don't know if for me, the striking lesson the night of the elections was that here in Ontario, the Liberal and the NDP leaders for the provincial elections were the only two leaders that were going around shaking hands with face masks on still. That's quite something, right?
Yeah.
And guess which two stepped down unprecedentedly that night? Those two.
Yeah.
Because they did so horribly in the polls.
Right.
So those which were wearing masks the night of the election now have had to step down. That gave me so much hope. And the fact that I saw so many other small parties on the ballot.
Yeah.
It's like there's actually a fragmentation that's happening within society where people are like, we're done with this, and I'm willing to risk my vote on a smaller party just so my voice can be heard.
Yeah. And not just smaller parties, but smaller parties that lean right. So it's like you had
Sure, yeah, the Green are always there, and
the Green, too. But I mean, it's good to see fractured fractured parties. Like, sorry, it's good to see these smaller parties kind of coming up, but also the conservatives still winning an overwhelming majority. But and I'm not. This isn't like a right wing, left wing. I just it's what am I trying to say? I don't have anything like. I think that this was a difficult crisis to manage, and but I found the Ford government a little inconsistent, and there were a few things that they did that I was didn't support. So it's nice that I was able to. I also was pretty sure they were going to win this election. So it was nice to have the option of like, you know what, I would rather go with one of the other parties that are, they sort of have nothing to lose at the moment because they aren't in power. But like, I think by sort of voting for these smaller ones, I can support that kind of larger movement to keep, like I said, it's always a tug of war, right? So you've got like this.
Well, my theory on this was that I consider myself sort of a disenfranchised liberal. I'm a very boring sort of center of the road Canadian. But the entire politics of the country overall seems to have shifted so far to the left, and then the parties are only concerned about staying in power. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I bring like the national consciousness more centered? I need to tug on the right a little bit. So in order to pull those parties that have gone center left more back to the center. So I almost see it's like a war for the like a tug of war for the consciousness of the soul of the country almost. Yeah. So like you said, there was more fragmentation of parties on the right-hand side, and their growth to me was great because it's saying there's more voices on that side that the larger they become, the more legitimate they become. Yeah. And therefore, center-ish right parties like the Conservatives must listen to those parties or they're going to bleed votes to that side.
Right, yeah.
Right? And then that pulls the narrative a little bit more, the tension back to the center.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, I think the greatest danger is that you just keep voting for the same party your whole life because like, well, that's my team and, I'm a fan for life and that's it. I think that's what they kind of bank on, your loyalty, because it's emotional. My parents are like that, They know which party brought them to Canada and gave them a great life. But that was 60 years ago.
Right, yeah.
It's a much different world now.
You once said that you truly believe, I'm paraphrasing, but you truly believe that the overwhelming majority of people just want the best for everyone.
Yeah.
And like, I agree. I think that the problem is not like, because you said that everything was tilting very left. I think it really just comes down to a lot of apathy, a lot of things, people being very busy and being, it comes back to like the media and people seeing like short clips. And people on the left are very good at sort of maximizing that medium.
Well, the rhetoric on the left is always the more like universal, humane, community oriented,
right.
And with very few words, you can create a slogan that is very hard to have a nuanced conversation against.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And therefore, like, aren't you, of course, climate change? And like, yeah, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm as me personally, like I'm as green as a person can probably be, but don't politicize it beyond that which it is.
Right. The hell was that noise?
I don't know. I think they're listening to us.
Yeah, it's like that thing in my car. So I remember back in when was it? It was the last time so Morrissey is frontman of the Smiths, or used to be. And has had quite a splendid solo career since then as well. Anyway, he, very opinionated guy, and he stopped coming to Canada to do concerts because of the seal trade. I think that was the reason. He's obviously a big animal rights activist. I'm a huge Morrissey fan in terms of his music, and sometimes in terms of his politics, but sometimes things, I personalize these things too much. Like it's just, it's one of those situations where it's hard to, you should never really idolize, really anybody that's like, you know what I mean? Like, cause you really get into these situations where like, it's almost like a betrayal, like a personal betrayal. If like, he stopped touring in Canada, I was like, maybe I'll just stop listening to him or something. Yeah. It's like, it lasted like a week. But anyway, I remember the last concert I saw him here in, I think he comes back now, actually. I just haven't been to see him for a while. But like for the You Are the Quarry tour, and he was on stage and he's like, he said, I have I had to change the album cover of You Are the Quarry for Canada because you can't have a gun on the front on the cover.
Wow, I didn't know
Yeah,
about
and I
that,
was
yeah.
like, oh, I didn't know that either. So, but that makes sense because I was like, yeah, because if you look at the British cover or whatever, it's like he's holding a Tommy gun, and then in ours, it's just like a close up of his face. I always just thought it was like an artistic choice or whatever. He's not.
I was living in
overly
Greece then,
modest.
so I had the European
really?
version. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I've
yeah.
never. You're
Yeah.
giving me new information here, Jason.
So he and I assume in that one he had the full the full gun.
Yeah,
But-
gangster.
Yeah. And he yeah, what I think of gangster, I think of Morrissey.
Don't we all?
The
Maybe he is the original gangster. The guy's doing whatever he wants whenever he
Sure.
wants.
Yeah, man. Like
It's
he's
kinda cool.
Yeah, he's and the funny thing is some of the stuff he's said and done and over the years, you're like, he just keeps getting away with it because
Well,
he's just like,
He's a very good example of a powerful individual.
yeah,
Someone who's struggled with self-actualization but has made it pretty high.
yeah,
Up
yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy,
Right.
It's kind of in a sense that maybe that's what his words don't bother me so much. I'm like, he's just expressing himself and he feels insulated enough to be able to do so.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. I don't have to agree with it. Why do I have to agree with it?
I always liked, and it's obviously one of the great tragedies that the Smiths broke up, but like I always remember Johnny Marr's quote, and not to get down a whole thing here, but I remember Johnny Marr's quote of saying like, what was it like? It was that song Golden Lights. You know that one where it's like, some like,
It's a Johnny Marr song?
no, it's a Smiths song, but it's like, it's probably, in my opinion, their worst song, but it's just, and it's some cover of like some, I don't know, 50s movie star did something. You know how he got into that whole,
Of course,
like,
yeah.
and Johnny Marr was like, I didn't start a rock band so I could do these kinds of songs or whatever. And I think that was like around that point that they were kind of like started going, splitting up. But like, Morrissey's always like, he was so specific about how they designed the covers and how he did, like, he knew exactly what he wanted all the way through. And you have to appreciate that, like, articulation of like, anyway.
He's a man of vision. And he's been changing and growing throughout the years. I don't know. I think he's a wonderful example of a self-actualized human being who has struggled. He has his own struggles, and he's pretty open about his struggles.
Yeah. I always wonder about,
Will
like,
nature make a man
stuff.
of me yet? Sort of thing. Like it's. I think the struggle is so. It's so in your face and it's wonderful. It's very raw. It is quite punk in a sense, or gangster.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, it is. Like, and he sings about some stuff that's like, very. You have to really have guts to sing about some of the stuff that they, especially with the Smiths. But like still now he does. Anyway, where was I going with that? So here's my point: is that like that's a ridiculous law that you can't have a gun on, and I probably originated. Maybe it was like I can just imagine like in the 80s there was probably some like rap thing that they had a gun, and there's some like parent group that was like, oh, we don't want our kids listening to that, so they were
Because
like,
if you see a picture of a gun, my God.
like, and these are the kinds of things. It's like, we have to, as a society, be more, recognize that what we want for laws are things that are much more broad in perspective. Like, we don't want, like the less government intervention, the better. As a general rule.
I have an interesting sort of thing on this. Is it the freedom to or the freedom from? So, for instance, outlawing theft, murder, rape, it outlaws one's freedom to do such horrific things. But it also helps protect one's freedom from having their possessions being stolen, being murdered, or having one's body violated. So this is, it's a very delicate balance,
Except one, I think, and I'm just, I haven't thought this through, but one seems to imply, like the onus is on oneself to do the freedom to, whereas on the other, it's like the onus is on somebody else.
True.
So,
yeah, and 9 times out of 10, I do fall on the what strengthens the responsibility of the individual.
Right.
As opposed to being dictated to from an external force.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I guess all of this is just I understand the argument, like, for more gun control. I can understand. So I think we should talk more broadly and speak of Canada and America, because right now it's, in terms of Canada, I think that our gun laws are some of the tightest in the world, and I don't think that we need to increase them. Like,
Well, when the police chiefs come out and tell you these laws are not going to actually eliminate the number of criminal activity happening by guns.
Yeah.
These are the people that are on the front lines, theoretically losing men on the job, men and women on the job, to people with criminals with guns. You got to take that to heart.
You do, but I think the argument from the side of somebody who does support more gun control laws is they would say, well, but what are you arguing against? If somebody says like you have to mandate, you have to wear a mask or you have to get a vaccine, I think at least the more tolerant people on the other side of the issue will be like, okay, like we get that they don't necessarily want to put something in their body or whatever. There's some measure of like bodily autonomy. This, I think, is like, well, what do you need a gun for? Like, so you can go play shoot 'em up at a thing. Like it doesn't seem like when you weigh those things that one seems much more valuable than the other. Like if you're just taking away somebody's gun, it's
bodily
not really
autonomy is much more personal.
Yeah. So I can understand people saying like, okay, even if the police chiefs are saying that, it still gets more guns out of the country or whatever. But I think that the problem with that kind of reasoning is that you could sort of say that about anything. If you're sort of saying that about something that you don't have a vested interest in. If you don't go out and you don't go to a gun range or anything, sure. If you think that the government's just fine and you don't worry about like some future where they might be able to take, they might get a little more tyrannical, then that's fine too. I mean, history is replete with examples where that has happened, but to each their own. But what you're saying with this is like, not only do I not believe that stuff's going to happen, I don't want anybody else to believe it either. And I'm going to take away something that I'm going to take away their right to something else because I don't think that they should have it because it doesn't seem like a big deal to me.
True, but if their right to something else is causing a pandemic, whether it be viral or criminal, you can say, okay, for the greater good, we need to have some infringement on our rights. But back to the stats, when 86% of the crime is happening in guns that have been illegally brought into the country.
Right.
You're not really getting to the core issue.
Yeah, it's like,
And
so
in that case,
case,
treat it like a core. Sorry to cut. Yeah, I think it's to treat it like can we reduce the tumor by 14%? Will that help? Sure, but you still got 86% of the tumor.
How do
we fix the core issue here?
Right.
Because that's going to create if we're all about this, that's what's going to create the greater good.
Right, and if you're really serious about it, then go get tighter border controls. You know what I mean? Do something like that. Invest in technology that will, I was about to say something. Then I thought maybe that wouldn't be such a good idea, just scanning cars as they came in, because then it's like...
we're talking about digital tracking and digital IDs and, social credit scores of all these like quite heavy-handed, totalitarian, technocratic solutions on individual citizens. Can't we just apply those at the border?
Right,
so these guns don't get in with and leave me alone.
Yeah.
That will take care of 86% of your problem. Like leave me alone.
Yeah.
Go to where the problem is and leave the individual citizen alone.
Yeah, like, you really, in my opinion, you should always just really have to make your case to infringe on people's rights, even if you don't agree with their rights. Like, I don't smoke, and I think, when I see people smoking, I think to myself, like, like I used to smoke. Like
Jason, you used to smoke. And
I did.
And you stopped smoking.
Yeah.
How did that didn't happen through government intervention?
Exactly. Yeah. No, it happened. I will say it probably did to some extent because of the high taxes on it and the constant sort of propaganda and I don't say that in a pejorative sense. Like I recognize that the stuff is actually bad for you, but like. I don't know if I would have like eventually one day I was just like, you know what, I can't run as well if I'm smoking. So I was like, for me, that was the final decision. But I also, up until then, I would buy them and, they had those like ads on the cigarettes would show like a pregnant woman or like they would show like, there was one that just like show the inside of like a lung or something. And it's just like, Jesus, like, so when you have that, like, that did probably subconsciously, I think it probably, if I'm honest, as much as loath as I am to admit it.
Well,
but
it was more information.
It was
and
more
let's
information.
Call it correct information. This wasn't information that was debatable at this point.
Right.
We're like, well, the government, so
it wasn't like
taking
the
part of
COVID,
14% of the population only has that lung. Like this is going to happen if I keep doing this with a high correlation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but I want to be able to come to that decision on my own. And I think I would have. I'd never thought I would smoke forever.
So they never banned smoking. They just gave information that slowly it happened organically over time.
Correct.
So kind of like your thing about let the clubs sort of peter out over time, or
Right.
just other rules. Let
Yeah.
it give information, but let it actually take root deeply seated in the actual population, as opposed to sort of just tacked on as a new law, as of January 1st tomorrow you can't do X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Well,
Which feels very artificial, fake, and forced.
I would say yes. I would say that this is kind of the worst way of doing this, so just outright sort of stopping something. But also, I didn't like the fact that there was so many, that there were tax dollars spent on, the sort of propaganda arm of the criminal, like stigmatizing smoking and everything like that, and like, you can't smoke within this far of a public building, and everything like that. Like, and now I understand that it's nuanced. I understand that it's like, in terms of the tax dollars, people will say like, oh, look at all the money it's saved, and people not going having to get cancer or whatever. And it's like, okay, yeah, fine, but like, overall, I don't think it's ever a good idea to sort of strong arm, whether it's like socially strong arming or mandating. But I will say the socially strong arming is preferable to the mandating. So that's with the smoking.
Are you happy you quit smoking?
Obviously, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I still have dreams where I'm smoking, which is weird. But I had.
Are they dreams that are more like nightmares?
Yeah, because I'm like, oh, like I just broke my record
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like, because it's been, I don't know, 15 years now that I haven't smoked or something. So it's.
I forgot. I remember, of course, you're
Yeah,
such
yeah.
a smoker.
Oh, I
just
smoked
hadn't
a
come
lot,
up in
yeah.
conversation at all lately. And I
Yeah.
just thought maybe you're smoking less. I didn't know you actually. It's quite a revelation here today, folks.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Between that and the Morrissey cover.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. So, but anyway, I think, so the point with all this is this, there's no, like, I recognize that the majority of Canadians probably support this, the freezing of sales of handguns and everything.
but they support it emotionally.
Yeah, exactly.
As do
Exactly.
I emotionally.
Right.
I don't care to own a gun, and guns kill people. So you just, you kind of do this sort of like, well, then less guns means less killing people. How can
Yeah.
you argue against such a thing? But like we said earlier, if 86%, you're not actually getting to the core issues here.
Yeah. So, and I think that the problem is like you have, this is, the Trudeau government lost nothing by doing this. Like any of the people who are hardcore,
They were
like
never gonna vote
they
for
weren't going to
them
vote
anyways,
for him
yeah.
anyway. So he's not losing anything by doing this politically. I think the problem is that we have to always be careful that when the government decides to take something away from us as a society.
It's the normalization of these activities.
Exactly.
Now we're saying, like they used to say in the USSR, if you have nothing to fear, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Yeah.
And it becomes
yeah.
normalized, that type of way of thinking.
Yeah, yeah. So, and it's unlikely that that's going to harm Trudeau in the next election. I hope the litany of other.
But just like
things he's
masking,
done.
Jason, it's like sometimes, like, I think governments just want to look like they're doing something, whether it actually has any effect on the population or not.
Right. Yeah.
Did masking actually work? Most people will tell you, statistically, show me one randomized control trial that actually proves that masking works. You won't
Yeah.
find one. Okay. But they wanted to look like they were doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of the shooting in the United States, the federal government here wants to look like they're doing something.
Yeah.
Whether it will actually have an effect, the police chiefs seem to think no.
Right.
Right?
What do you make of, like, I know, if we shift this a little bit to America, and like, I do think that, you talk about, and, see YouTube videos online, and I know some people in the States too I actually know somebody who owns like a gun store, and yeah, they love their guns. Like, it is, they're very passionate. They know a lot about them, and like you, I found that most of them seem, or all the ones I know seem very responsible with them, and they're very like, take it seriously,
I find, if I can just be generous, and maybe you can tell me if you felt this or not, there are people that are actually they love their freedom, but they also have a tremendous respect for authority. Like,
Right.
they respect
Yeah.
the police, the
Yeah.
military, that sort of stuff, but to a limit, but they have a high regard for them.
Yeah.
These are not the type of people that will be usually joining campaigns to say defund the police.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
therefore, they're okay with authority and policing and the arming of police.
Right.
Right. It's almost like they just want to have a balance, like a tit for tat sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's I would agree with that.
It's a very
as well.
interesting psychology, because in those who say defund the police are the same people that are saying get rid of guns in society in general.
Yeah.
They've gone about it in
Yeah.
a different way.
Yeah.
Like, just get rid of all sorts of. But which one is the most pragmatic solution?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just as we're sitting here, I pulled up some stats here on Reader's Digest from 2020. But taking these as they come, like total U.S. gun violence deaths in 2020 were about 43,000 people in the United States, of which 24,000-ish were suicide, 19,000 homicide. So that's pretty devastating. But the much smaller portions of the pie, mass murders 21 and mass shootings 611. So if you were to combine those to around 650 compared to the homicides of 20,000,
Yeah.
and what percentage of the homicides are happening from guns that were legally acquired? Probably
Right.
Back to somewhere around the 85-15 ratio. So are all these laws actually going to be fixing the bulk of the problem?
Yeah, and I think that, because you could always, I think the argument would be like that's interesting because like the smallest portion of that is what has the most media coverage, and that's probably why most people have this idea that guns are this massive problem in this U.S.
Well, guns are a massive problem, but I don't know if the solutions are going to be addressing the bulk of the problem.
Yeah, and again, like I'm not trying to minimize anything. Like and the U.S. is a different animal from Canada in terms of gun ownership. It's just that it's what's drawing the public's attention, and there just needs to be sort of sober looks at these. Like every time there's a mass shooting, it's always the same thing that you see played out on the news. It's like, the Democratic politicians screaming at the Republicans to like stop letting the NRA influence them or whatever. And it's like, I don't know if the NRA is as big of a lobby as they were in the past or not, but like then you get people, and then you get the Republicans sort of doing this awkward dance where they don't want to.
Well, the NRA is very well organized, and they have a tight relationship with the gun manufacturers too. So it becomes its own little, tough little walnut to crack.
Right.
But to take a gun control stance, I don't know if it's the right solutions. Guns compared to cancers, there's about 40,000 people who die of breast cancer every year in the United States, 45,000 die of pancreatic cancer, and roughly 40,000 who die of gun violence.
Right. Yeah. So,
so
in that context, is something, if you can get rid of it, wouldn't you want to get rid of it?
It's a cancer.
Yeah.
Like my analogy before, it's a tumor. But how do we address the bulk of the tumor? From addressing the mass shootings, which were a very, very small percentage of the overall, infectious rate, let's call it, or are you going to address where the bulk of the problem is? Yeah, and that's where I come back to. Like, I know it sounds like such an old-fashioned guy, but like family values, education, freedom leads to prosperity. Prosperity leads to a better lifestyle. I just don't. I don't know if this is a band-aid. A lot of these things that are not going to, that looks good and gets certainly the politicians a lot of good FaceTime on the TV, but it doesn't. I don't see it as being addressing. I'm all about practical results. I don't know if this is going to bring the results we wish it to have, that it's being sold as.
Yeah. I think that there are. I think there's something to that. I think that like when you look at, and I don't know how. If you just want to look at the mass shootings, and again, this is a small portion of it. Although let's look at all of them, because I think the majority of violent crime comes from inner cities, and you have it's usually the families aren't exactly, it's usually poverty. There's usually there's a reason why these people are in gangs, or they feel that they need to shoot somebody else. It's like
where the gun becomes more prominent.
Yeah, or like a symbol of masculinity or something in some cultures, or some subcultures. But I think there's something to that whole like needing stronger family, stronger role models. I think a lot of these ones, and I don't know if it's just that they're the more sensationalized ones, like the guy on the Danforth here in Toronto, where it was like. Of the incel variety, So like, and just for those who are listening, that in Toronto a few years ago, on a popular in the sort of Greek neighborhood in Toronto, this guy just opened fire and killed, I don't know, was it 14 people or something?
Somewhere
20?
In the tens.
Yeah,
between 10 and 20.
And he just,
walked into
kind of
restaurants.
went on a rampage.
Young families eating dinners. It was quite
right. And like, so that's, he was part of, and you see this a lot with school shootings, where it's like part of these like little it's like almost like they aren't socialized properly. Like they don't have like maybe a lot of friends, or they don't have like, they're very engaged online.
Yeah.
They have people, they, tend to gravitate toward, forums that would, sort of, I wouldn't say promote this kind of thing, but like, people supporting like radical action and things like that.
Yeah. Well, in his particular case, I think there was a little bit of that incel. I think the gun was illegally acquired. And I think you might throw in a little bit of ISIS into that too. There was a bit of,
Really? With a pinch of ISIS?
A little pinch of ISIS.
Well,
there you got the hot cocktail going.
What? Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a bit of that.
Okay. Well, I mean,
but to be attracted to such an ideology, you already have to be quite on the edge as a person.
Yeah.
Suicidal of sorts,
So you get into, certainly mental illness. You get into, but I think mental illness is like, this is another show we need to do, is one on mental illness, because I think that there's a lot of the things that you would sort of traditionally refer to as mental illness, like depression or anxiety, schizophrenia. There's a ton of different ones. But I think there's also, it's almost like our culture has developed its own kind of like look, like people spending a lot of time online in these little silos where they're reinforcing these kind of radical views. Over time, that really eats away at somebody's personality and how they view the world through sort of a skewed lens. So like, whether that's technically a mental illness or not, like those kinds of situations are a problem. Like these especially young boys aren't being socialized in a way that is helping them integrate properly into society.
Well, when you're the last one picked for the sports team, and you when you're a child, you learn so many things when you can be socialized in a normal way. Like you get into a fist fight. What is it all about? How do you stop such a thing from happening? How do you reconcile these differences? And then you take these life lessons into the adult world, but you've had your sort of grooming as a child where you're able to make your mistakes in sort of a confined box. And then you know how to actually behave properly within the norms of society. But if you are siloed off and on your phone, and you are not socializing, because it's difficult sometimes for some of these young kids to socialize, they now have a legitimate out, let's say, and they never get to develop, to a lesser degree, get to develop these secondary life, lessons.
Yeah. Yeah, like, is this happening more now? First of all, is it happening more now? And secondly, to the people that it's happening to, like this kind of almost archetype of the person, of the like kind of loner, internet obsessed, I just sound like I feel so old when I'm saying things like that. But like somebody who's just like spending all their time on,
digital
like
echo
4chan's
chambers
poll or something like that. Like,
digital echo chambers. You're gonna find your tribe in there, and be like, yeah, man, me too. I feel the same. I wish X, Y, Z. That sort of thing. And there's nothing to pull you back.
Right. Yeah, and if you don't have the sort of real world structure there to like kind of keep you grounded. You get into these situations where
there's novels. You got Narnia and the Turkish Delight. You remember the little treat that the White Witch gives? Which was the boy that was first caught? Peter, I believe his name was, and then he just you lose your mind, you lose your memory, you lose your desires for the real world. You're actually living in a fantasy world, or Odysseus on the island of Calypso.
Right.
And then you're trapped on your own little siloed world away from it. At some point, you have to come back to reality.
Yeah.
We've created now these little silos where you don't have to come back to reality, and you can find like-minded people, which may not have your best mental health interests at heart.
Yeah. And I guess that's it, right? Like, maybe it's that simple. Like, I mean, I just think of like when we grew up, it wasn't like, we were in that kind of almost hybrid zone where, I think I was fully grown up by the time, the internet came around, like when I was in university. So it was like, I'd already like gone through the formative years, but like, I don't ever remember, like you said, like, it's like you learn all of those ways of adjusting to society. Like you either get in the fights or you whatever, the bullying stuff, you sort of work that out almost like and in a natural way. And I don't know what is different now other than, I'm just thinking out loud. Like I don't have sort of the answers. I'm just like, I guess a person's growing up now and they're bullied online too, maybe.
How about, very simple, reality matters. You know,
Yeah.
and then when you're in virtual reality of sorts, which we're
Yeah.
only encouraging more of the metaverse and everything else, you're not going to understand then how to negotiate your being in the real world.
Right.
And then you find yourself at a great disadvantage to those who are more highly acclimatized to the real world. And you feel even more isolated from the real world.
Yeah.
And you only bury yourself more into the island of Calypso where you don't have to socialize with the rest of the world
Yeah.
until you finally, at some point, snap, you know?
Right. You know, it's interesting. I'm just thinking about the incels. I don't know if that's still a thing or if it's.
I believe they still, yeah, it's a thing. And it's a growing thing with more social, isolationism happening through the digital means.
But and I think like, not to be glib about this, but isn't that like a big part of the problem is these guys just aren't getting laid? You know, like is it that simple? Like there's just because like when you're younger, you sort of learn the socializations, and then you're like, okay, if I wanted to, date this girl, then I have to behave in a certain way, and you kind of like tone down certain things or you tweak your personality.
Well, to look as a good prospective mate, you have to bring something of value to the table.
Right.
And if you are not bringing something to the value table, what traditionally happens is you go work on yourself.
Yeah,
Get in
yeah.
shape, get a good haircut, get a degree, get a job, make yourself more prospectively, as a prospective mate and more attractive. And if you're not developing these parts of your personality, of your character, of your being, and you're just in your own you're going to feel like, well, I got nothing to lose because the world doesn't want me anyways.
Right.
And then you're going to get into some echo chamber where that sort of thought is encouraged and amplified, and it's just you're not doing yourself or society as an individual any benefit. And you throw a gun into their hand or something, you got even it's a powder keg ready to blow up.
Right. Yeah. Have you heard of this?
It just comes back to just an ill-functioning society, of which the gun is simply an extension of that. The core problem is an ill-running society.
Well, I would say I wouldn't necessarily say the gun is that. I would say that these shootings, like these people that are going on these mass shootings.
No one's gonna like mass stab somebody to death.
Right. So if you're saying that if the gun isn't there, then they wouldn't do it in the first place.
They may do something, but it won't have such a large negative effect. That's the number one for me. Like the number one, critique against your point is the gun is just so efficient at killing people. That if you put that in their hands, it's just you're giving them way too much firepower in order to enact their fantasies.
So, well, think of this situation though. If you have, and I've heard this argued, and I know that this sounds a little, I can see an argument against this, but like, if you have, say, a school shooter going in armed to the teeth, all the guns obtained illegally, we'll say, for example. And then they go in, and then you have some, they get through whatever like security at the school, if that's something that they even have, and then they go in, they start shooting kids. Wouldn't it be better to have like a teacher who's like, has a legal firearm, they happen to carry it with them, and then they can actually do something about it, as opposed to waiting until, the police arrive? And like in the case of the Uvalde, like I don't know the details, but from what I heard, they didn't do anything. Like
that's something, I think professionals have to answer, like how can you effectively train, teaching staff to, because could there be stats? I'm just playing devil's advocate that if you then meet a shooter who's got more guns than you and you have a single handgun and you're not particularly super trained at it, and they have been practicing for 6 months because they've been unemployed in their mother's basement practicing at the shooting range every day.
Yeah.
What is the likelihood of success?
Well,
a deterrent, maybe, but engaging somebody in the hallway and they've got some flash bombs and grenades and everything else, and you got like a pistol.
Well, isn't it better
crying in the other room?
Isn't it better than nothing? Like, he's going to shoot him anyway, right? Like as far as I could tell, he was shooting everybody he could.
I guess at that moment, if you're cowering underneath the desk as a teacher, you're just like, they're coming, so I wish I had something in my hand. So perhaps, but I can only think that then just like if you bring, I can see, again, I'm not an expert, but I could see maybe let's say a police officer here saying, just lock the door and stay away from the person and do not engage them. That will have a better rate of success. So maybe the doors have to have like some sort of like lockdowns, like boom, they just bolt automatically and you can't get in. Like that might have a better like health benefit than actually arming the teachers.
Sure. I'm not saying like, I think that I don't love that argument of saying like, well, we just need more security at the schools. It's like nobody wants to live in a fortress kind of
Well, imagine that's your kids' first experience in the real world.
Yeah, but I would say that other countries do have those kinds of things. Like they, maybe that's not how. Like you know what? Look, America's got their own thing going on with guns, and like we're kind of coming from a Canadian perspective, so it's hard. Like it really is something that, I don't like that idea either. I don't think it's great to have schools be security zones. But I mean, you like. If you want to sort of step back from that, and I guess we kind of can as Canadians, we have that sort of luxury of going back and being like, well, look at Canada, it's actually not that bad here. But like, if you did have a mass shooter in Canada, like having somebody who did have a legal firearm with them would have been, that really is a way to effectively stop a shooter if there is one. I mean, in the rare circumstances where there is one, because again, these people are, for the vast majority of them, are obtaining these weapons illegally anyway. Like it's not like they're like signing up for their PAL license, waiting like while the RCMP does its background check and then going and shooting something.
I don't know. I think teachers have a hard enough time attracting good quality teachers. When they're finding good quality teachers that can actually pick up firearms.
Yeah. So a lot about history and what kind of marksman are you?
I got the job because I'm a crack shot.
No, I agree.
I just somewhere in my instinct says I need to talk to a professional about this because I just don't know if doing that will have the effect. If it has the effect, I'm all behind it, sure. Yeah. But I need to see like some data behind that. I would just go for a more simple answer, just a regular citizen, like make the doors bulletproof and they're automatically locked.
Yeah, it's probably expensive to do that.
Sure, but guns aren't cheap either. I mean, a bulletproof door, bang, it's electronic and it locks.
Yeah.
Yes, they
I
could
wonder
come
if that's
through
a
windows.
fire hazard or you know what I mean, like.
Take your chances. Pick your
There's
poison.
always something. Yeah.
But I just if you could keep the person in the hallway, and all where the kids are locked down. I would say there's something to some sort of efficiency in that. Like we did have a mass shooter at the Parliament in Ottawa a couple of years ago, and I think it was our Prime Minister at the time that hid in the closet.
Is that true? Is that true?
Yeah. Stephen Harper hid in a closet somewhere as the shooter went away. So what I'm trying to say is if you can corridor yourself off and hunker down behind something that is relatively bulletproof, you probably have a low cost, sufficient answer to the problem. And then certainly police stations, maybe they have to be located within a certain distance of schools in the future. So, you call them and they can be there in a very, predetermined by law set of time, like 2 minutes max, they're there.
Right.
So you don't have to actually have teachers with guns in the school. Just get the police who are trained with guns to be at the school in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And in that interim, you've hunkered down everybody in the school as efficiently as you can.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think those are probably reasonable ideas. There's talk in the States about putting in certain barriers. Apparently this guy drove the car right up and that was a big problem because it was, it was quicker for him to get in and, but putting barriers there and there are, I think, solutions to these things that don't have to involve taking away guns. I will say that, some of the, banning automatic rifles, there are some, this is the kind of thing where it's I do understand the argument from the other side about there being some sort of gun control. And I do think that it is very dangerous if you have people with, assault style weapons. If that's something that is easier to obtain because there are no laws around it, then that can be a problem. I just think it's a kind of issue that people should tread more carefully on than I think that they are doing now.
Because you just get the whole, going back to previous episodes, you get the whole virtue signaling. I support no guns because guns kill people, so therefore, and you kind of create your argument that way. I'm just being a little cartoonish. What happened to the good old fashioned sleep grenades? Can teachers just chuck them in the hallway and everybody put the person you think they're wearing a mask to prevent the air? I never tasers. Why does it always have to be just a gun?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, maybe they do wear. If that sort of got out, I think maybe some of them would wear masks. These people, you see them, these shooters. They get all, done up in military garb and everything. It's not.
This is it. This is their last 10 minutes on Earth, sort of thing. So perhaps, Again, I'd just like to hear professionals' point of view, cost effectiveness, efficiency, low level of training is sufficient. you could maybe say, if to your point, a teacher has a gun, they also have bulletproof vests in there. So they feel at least a little more confident if they have to confront an individual. They have at least not just a gun, but it takes 30 seconds or even less to put on a bulletproof vest. It's something.
Yeah.
But a sleep grenade, a taser, something, a relative close distance to the actual police stations. There's got to be other solutions involved.
Yeah.
Which would probably have a much greater effect of reducing that 14% that we're talking about, right?
And I would also say that it's probably something like in the States, it's a polarized issue. So like, wouldn't it make more sense for the instead of just ranting at each other after every shooting, maybe try to find some compromise in there and think like, okay, what can we both do that we can all agree on? Like they all, presumably all agree that the shootings are bad. So like, let's find a way to agree on the method and the apparatus we can put into place to deal with the shootings, as opposed to, one side wanting to ban guns and the other side saying like, we don't want to, you're not going to take our guns. And like, it's like, it shouldn't be about that. It should be about getting more granular with the situation and figuring out a solution there.
Yeah, I just find it overly simplified. Like, if they got a gun, I'll get a gun. Like kind of give the teacher the guns. There's got to be a little more nuance.
Yeah. Well, I regret saying it. Just like using it as an example. I'm just like to me, if you're going to say the argument of like, well, more guns are bad. It's like, well, yeah, but like if you have an armed shooter going in, strictly speaking, binary question here. Like, is it safer or less safe if somebody else who is a legal gun owner has a gun? And I think the answer is, I think yes. But I regret saying it because it's not. It's not that I think that we need more guns. I just think that it's like the situation of this like school shooting sort of epidemic or whatever you want to call. There are other ways that we can kind of deal with this.
Multiple defense systems. Like with Ronald Reagan in the 80s, we had the arms race of the Cold War, and he created the Star Wars. The targeting laser. There was another defensive mechanism in order to prevent such like a nuclear bomb from coming in from Russia, let's say. Right. So maybe instead of having the history teacher, maybe there is a cop who's well trained for all this in each school,
right?
But just one in the office, and you never really see them for the most part,
Right.
And they're very friendly, and they go around and talk to everybody. But in the, God forbid, once every, even if it happened once in somebody's academic career of 14 years in schools, but at least that one person was there that one particular day, and they were perfectly trained for this moment.
Yeah.
But putting that gun into a history teacher's hand, I just don't think, when push comes to shove, will they actually have what it takes to do what is asked of them? I don't know.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, if you're just like, it's like a nuclear reactor, right? Like if for 20 years your job is just to sit there, like I'm thinking of Homer Simpson now, just to sit there eating donuts. It's like, and then suddenly these alarms go off. Are you really going to be
They weren't
prepared?
trained for that moment. Whereas if you have that one police officer who's just like, I've been waiting like my whole career for this one time to happen.
Right.
Holy my God, it's happening right now. But this is what I'm paid for, and this is my moment. So I don't like the idea of police in schools, but I could see that, as more like almost like a armed social worker of sorts. Right. You have like because a good rapport. I don't like the militarization of anything that has anything to do with children.
Yeah.
But if you can do it in a soft way, that's more of a deterrent than anything.
Right.
And and then other mechanisms like defense mechanisms, like I said, bulletproof doors or whatever, that are electronically engaged. Perhaps that would have a better effect overall.
There are. Like we talk about this stuff, even having a cop in a school or whatever, and maybe that is a good idea. I'm not commenting on that, but it's like it almost gives the impression that this stuff is like happening all the time, and it's extraordinarily rare that this would ever happen. Like the chances,
exactly.
Yeah.
They might be waiting their whole career. Like we have, I was not a fan when I first started seeing police officers in our malls in Canada. I'm like, well, now we're becoming so Americanized. We have to have them walking around. But in the end, they have their one little office off to the side, and somebody had something shoplifted. They have somewhere to go and actually place a complaint.
Right.
There's other things that can go on there other than just like the moment they have to run out to the food court with their guns, right?
Sure, yeah. In the case of the cop of the school, maybe, some kid bullies another, and then they have to have a session with the cop there, and like, they can put the fear of God into them or whatever.
That's what I was getting with the whole, it can be a more social worker point of view almost, right? Like it's not just about that one moment but when you need them, they're there, and they've been trained for this. They've been professionally trained for this one moment.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's my gut instinct as I'm talking to you right now is that will have a greater effect than, more gun control laws.
Yeah. Yeah. it's just the politics of it all bothers me. Like when this kind of came out,
It's nothing but politics.
Yeah,
because we're talking. You know what we're doing right now, Jason? We're talking solutions.
Yeah,
and I think the other people are talking politics.
Right.
Like, where is the pulse of the nation? And that's what I'm going to say, because therefore I'll get more votes.
Yeah.
And we're actually going into anything quite honest about this, going, okay, like we're just talking here with a cup of coffee, like how do we solve the problem?
Yeah.
And I never hear that level of dialogue between our politicians.
Yeah, that's a good
I think
point.
they're just simply going off the polls, and they just want the votes, and off they go. And you feel better as a citizen, but are you actually in a safer position?
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, so is there anything else you wanted to add? Or I hope that this, I mean, I think we started off this episode wanting to talk about this upcoming bill in Canada, and I don't know, we didn't get really into the nitty gritty of the bill or anything, but it's basically the gist of it anyway.
But do we really need to? Because in the end, like I said, if it's just politics and we're trying to problem solve, I think it's pretty safe to say this bill is not going to solve the problems we're trying to rectify here.
Yeah, for sure not, and it is just overall it becomes another erosion of our rights, and we just have to be aware of that as society. That's the one takeaway. I can even understand, again, and I sound like a broken record here, but I can understand the argument about worrying about guns, and I can understand not wanting guns to proliferate. Like I'm not somebody who is like in love with guns. I genuinely would have it because I'm concerned about sort of an overreach of government or society breaking down. It's a very cheap insurance policy as far as I'm concerned for that. But like I totally understand the idea that you don't want looser gun laws or anything like that. But I do think that we always, as a society, have to be very careful when the government wants to take anything away from us, regardless of whether it's something you have a personal interest in. There's just, it's an erosion that seems to be happening more and more. And, it's like the frog who is, put in a thing of water and it slowly heats up. And by the time you realize where you are, you're burning alive.
And perhaps I've approached this from a slightly different perspective in that, your argument that if someone breaks into your house, at least you have a gun in your house, and therefore you know how to use it, and perhaps you can make a better situation come out of it. I'm just approaching it like, why is a person breaking into your house? What happens in the society that has allowed that person to feel like they need to do such a thing in order to have a better life for themselves? Is it that they not have the upbringing they needed, the education they needed? And inevitably that's going to create a better outcome for society if we can get to the root cause, rather than, we'll try our best with society, sort of. In the interim, go get yourself a gun and, we'll have an arms race here and a bit of tension. That part still bothers me because I feel like anything we're talking about the gun control is not getting to the core reason of why people are doing criminal activity to begin with.
Well, you can ask them when they break in your house why they're doing it. Well, they have you at gunpoint.
Do you want to talk?
No, I agree. For sure, there's a lot of problems, a lot of like mental illness, poverty. There are a lot of issues that need to be.
And those issues may never be rectified. And there's a certain percentage of society, no matter what you do, are always going to be unhinged. And therefore, how do you police society? I know, I can see that. I think we've touched on a lot of good points here today, and it's been I've shifted a little bit.
Okay,
chatting with you, and I didn't expect that at all.
Yeah, and again, as Canadians, I think this issue is sort of like abortion, where it doesn't really have the same resonance as it does in the States. Our laws are, a lot different. But yeah,
and we have a greater quantity of middle class. And that really kind of our core issues are much less substantive than, let's say, in America.
Right.
So it's never been something that's really been at the forefront of like you move into a new house. Do I need to put Netflix, internet? What about my security system? That's just a new thing, really,
Right.
And then what else? A gun in my house? Like we've never had to go there as a society because we've done a better job of balancing all the key elements.
See, well, and maybe part of this fear comes from, being so close to the U.S. and getting a lot of their media, because, I'm thinking because in the U.S., and I could be wrong here, but it's the way I think it is like if somebody comes onto your property, at least in some states, and, you have the right to, if they're trying to steal something from you, they have the right to shoot them.
What is that law in Canada? Do you know?
You can't. A gun? You can't shoot them.
See, so that part there, if someone breaks into my house and I feel like my family's life is at risk, I will do everything to eliminate that risk. And if it means then I have to go to prison, I certainly hope that isn't the case by laws or actual reality and what I have to do. But you got to take it on first principles. You eliminate the threat however you can.
Yeah, like, and I think self-defense, you can't, like, I think that you can still use self-defense, but I think it's pretty tricky, and you better be sure that that person is going to
Good luck in the middle of the night, you know.
Exactly. That's the problem, and those are the nuances that get left out of these laws. So you're just left to be. So, like, am I going to have the time to unlock my safe, load it, like, do all the things that I need to do to effectively defend myself? Like, you know, probably not.
Do you sort of like try to internalize these things, like stop, drop, and roll? Do you put like,
right? Yeah.
I don't even know how I got it out of the case. It just was all unconscious. My muscle memory was there.
The truth is, they probably break in, and you know, it was like one of the few things that's valuable is the gun, so I just wouldn't even bring it out because I wouldn't want them to steal it.
It's like, Jason, let's make this interesting. I got your code here, 3964. Right. All right, I'll give you 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so, you know, the difference in the laws, it's just such a different philosophy with the U.S. and Canada, and it's actually really interesting how it all sort of evolved. But that is something that I would worry about. Just we don't have the freedom to sort of defend our property, or, you know what I mean, like, not to say that you can go out and just shoot somebody because they, you know, walked on your lawn or something, but like, you know, if you think that your life is at risk, or even that you think somebody's going to steal something of yours, like, don't you have the right to stop them? Like, you know, I don't know.
Outside of the house on the front lawn, no. Like, obviously, that's right. You know, you're in no immediate threat. But, you know, inside your house. Yeah. Like, what didn't our former prime minister say once? Somebody broke into his house, Jean Chrétien, and he actually grabbed them by the throat, and I think, like, threw him out of the house or something. And
did that happen? I know he actually did grab somebody by the throat.
You know, and he did. And I think the man, like, he grabbed like an Inuit statue of some sort as his weapon, or like something. Really? And I just remember the funny. I mean, I really adore the French Canadian accent, and I love when we have prime ministers that have French background like that. But he's like, when someone breaks into your house, you take them out.
Did he?
Yes, man.
Yeah, he was pretty hard ass.
But it's quite simple. Like, someone breaks into your house, you take them out.
Very basic stuff. Yeah.
You know, there's clear logic to that. It's your house. I was talking about freedoms and rights. If it's not your own house to do what you wish in your own house, they are coming into your world. Yeah. At that point, all bets are off for me.
Well, I think there was a case in England where somebody, I say this, you know, I don't know, like, you never know what's, you know, I just haven't fact checked. This was in the news. I just don't know 100% that this is like what happened. But like, it was this, basically somebody like it was like a cat burglar, and he fell through the person's roof and like broke, you know, his spine or something. But then he was suing because the roof wasn't structured in such a way. Yeah, and it's like situations like that. It's like, that's crazy. You're on your own. Like, that should be like a no-brainer. Like, you're breaking into somebody's house. Like, anything that happens to you at this point, like, short of like, you know, if, you know, sure, like an execution shot to the head or something is like maybe, but like, other than that, it's like you really people should have the ability to defend their own.
Can I ask you a question? Are tasers available in Canada? And would there be less paperwork involved, you know?
I don't know. It's a good question. You can get a bow and arrow, though, which is pretty cool, like, or a crossbow. And I don't think I don't think there are any laws against that now that you mention it.
I'm just, you know, because you're talking about just, you know, very simple safety. So did you need to do the nuclear option, or were there other options, like, you know, the old-fashioned baseball bat or bow and arrow, as you're saying, or a taser or something like that, you know?
Yeah, I never really... I never really looked into it. Yeah. The bow and arrow thing is kind of cool, but it's like, you know, that requires some skill, and I don't know, maybe that'll be the next step.
I have to wonder, though, because we talk about, and here we are talking about guns, but, you know, if tasers were talked about more often, you know, just like, you know, you sell them at Canadian Tire, like, your car breaks down on the side of the road, here's your little orange triangle and your flare. You need a taser gun? Get a taser gun, you know? Maybe you have to be 18 and older or something. I don't know. But at least you know you're not killing the other person, but you're giving yourself some time to escape the situation.
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, those are other options. I mean, there are other options if you really want to defend yourself or whatever. I just think of, like, the main reason I got it was really, it wasn't even really about, like, you know, government tyranny. It was more about, like, the breakdown of society. Like, if we had some major, you know, if a nuclear war broke out, like, it's not, you know, it's not so. outside the realm of possibility, right? So it's like if something like that happened, I mean, I guess we'd all be dead eventually anyway if it was an
Well, you
actual
have,
true
basic
nuclear war.
needs like
But
drinking water and, aspirin or
yeah.
food,
Well, I'll tell you, last week I felt like, or last, in 2020, like I ended up getting my gun license, I think in 2019 or something, and I felt like a genius when the COVID came out, and then there were all those riots all the time. I'm like, man, this is exactly what I was preparing for. like I
You're
really
like
called this
Leonidas
one.
in Sparta. I've been training my whole life for this moment.
Yeah, and it just sort of came in. Thankfully it never snowballed out of control. But like those are the situations where it's like, look, you hope never to have to use it, obviously, but it's just like,
to your point, I think a lot of people were stocking up the pantries.
Yeah,
I remember being in Whole Foods around March 20th, 2020, when it was really, and seeing people put like 50 cans of soup in their cart.
Right.
So, and this is like, but if the apocalypse comes, I better have some organic soup,
right.
Because the chemicals, I don't know, I just laughed, right? They were buying the fancy stuff.
Right.
But I mean, everybody was on edge, and I guess everyone, and to your point, then has their own right to, prepare for that, potential end, however they see fit.
You know what? And not to sort of like drag this out or whatever, but I remember, earlier on you said it, like we've been very lucky over the past, like since World War II, we've been very lucky. Mm-hmm. Like there hasn't been any major, and in Canada, we've been very lucky and very fortunate to not have, like we did, send soldiers over in World War I, World War II, but we have not, we've been, the general population, like, has been very fortunate in that we're distant from, just geographically where we are. We've got the United States is like the biggest superpower, and they're a friendly neighbor kind of thing. And we just kind of sit here and almost can't conceive of like a breakdown in society, or can't conceive of things just going irrevocably wrong, right? Like, but stuff does happen, right? Like
I'm sure a lot of people thought Noah was pretty stupid until it started raining.
Right.
Yeah. We're living this, like, talking about history repeating itself. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be paranoid, but preparation, is half the battle.
You know what? I rewatched the other night, and it's a great movie, and Deep Impact.
Maybe I saw it once. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's
the
really
Asteroid.
good. The Asteroid.
Bruce Willis.
No, that's
Morgan Freeman.
That's Armageddon. It's the one with Morgan Freeman.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Who is great in it. But it's the kind. Actually, that movie was very well done. I showed it to my partner, who is my girlfriend. I don't know. I say partner. It's like my business partner. But like, and she doesn't generally like that kind of thing. In fact, anything remotely sci-fi or actiony, I just don't watch with her, kind of thing, because it's just not her cup of tea. But I showed it to her, and she was like, because I was like, it was kind of my turn to watch or whatever, and she was like, I actually like that better than I thought I would, and it was a very intelligently done. Sort of disaster movie. Like it was very plausible, like all the steps that we're taking, like the president sort of, like they arranged it so that, like, they had their plan to send out a ship to blow it up, to blow up the comet. Then they had this second plan of just firing these nukes as soon as it came. And then they had this backup plan of saving 1 million people that they would put into a lottery into the limestone cliffs of Missouri, and having people rebuild civilization, like from that, if the worst case scenario happened. And like, that's the kind of situation where it's like, those things start to happen, and those events start to, if something like that ever happens, like, isn't it just better to be prepared? Like, isn't it better to have some sort of an insurance policy? Like,
yeah, for sure. I just, you got to have the right plan.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah, preparation. I completely agree. I've always aimed more for societal, change,
right.
Rather than just like quick fix, here's my gun. But maybe, like I was saying earlier, you need different layers to all of it. Yeah. On that note, there was during the lockdown, did you happen to see the movie that I think went straight to Netflix, Don't Look Up?
Oh yeah, I saw it.
I thought that was a nice modern take on it too, because a little bit cynical with social media and politics.
Yeah, it was good.
I saw a lot of, for me, a lot of parallels with the whole COVID vaccine thing, and just making taking a real problem, but politicizing the hell out of it.
Yeah, yeah, it was a well done.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, well, okay, so yeah, that's it for this week, and
another one in the bag.
Thank you all for listening, and take care out there.
Take care, guys. Bye.